Jai Jinendra, everyone. So today I will be presenting on what I've understood about Nirjara, one of the NavTattvas. So to start, here's the definition of Nirjara from our textbooks, which is the eradication or shedding of karma. But that's just like the denotation of it, and to fully understand it, we should talk about how it connects to the other tattvas as well, and how to achieve Nirjara. And the definition of samuday, as we've learned before, is the prevention of karma, or blocking the inflow of new karma. And you achieve samuday with controlling the mind, speech, and body, and correct faith, which is samyaktva. Back to Anushka's presentation, there's a analogy where there's a story of a doctor explaining how he tells if a insane man is cured, and that is with they have a bucket and they have a tap and they turn it on, and the tap is filling the bucket, and they ask the patient to remove all the water from the bucket, and if the patient stops the tap and then removes the water, then they are cured. But if they don't and they just keep using a mug to empty the bucket, then they're still insane. So the water, stopping the tap would be samuday and preventing the inflow of karma, and Nirjara is using a mug to empty the remaining water from the bucket. And the most important thing is that samuday is a prerequisite to Nirjara. So Nirjara means nothing unless you have samuday first. Yeah, and then another analogy that we talked about in class is the boat analogy. So if you think of it as a sinking boat and there's a hole in the boat, if you repair the boat first, that's kind of like samuday, which is stopping like the water from flowing in, and then emptying the boat with the remaining water is Nirjara. Before we discuss Nirjara, I'd like to talk about Vairagya Bhavna. And Vairagya Bhavna is the understanding that nothing outside of the Atma or in the world will make us happy. So Nirjara is not sustainable without understanding that. So Nirjara is the shedding of karma, and to reiterate, Nirjara is pointless without samuday. The Tattvarth Sutra, and it says that austerities wear off karmas as well as inhibit. And Nirjara is possible through types of tap. So before we go into tap, we should talk about the types of Nirjara. So there's sakam and there's akam. So sakam is when one intentionally sheds karma before it yields its fruit. So all types of tap fall under the sakam category because you're making a conscious effort to shed the karma. Akam Nirjara is a kind of karma's natural way of coming into fruition, and that is how the karma is shed, by just showing its effects. There is one section of the Navpad Puja on Samyak Tap, and so this is a gatha of that, composed by Mahamahopathyay Yashovijay Maharaj Sahib 350 years ago. So it goes, Ichcharo de samvari parinati samata yogere tapate ihja atma varate nij guna bhogere. So what the meaning of that sutra, overcoming desires defines tapasya. It leads to samuday, and samyak tapasya results in samta, which is peace or equanimity. True tap is that during which one experiences the quality of the soul, the qualities of the soul, which is bliss. So for something to be considered samyak tap, there has to be samta behind it, so that feeling of peace should be there. But doing samyak tap itself also increases that feeling of samta and peace. And another point I wanted to mention was that when people think of tap, they think of just not eating, but really when you're doing samyak tap, you're kind of feeding your soul this feast with showing its true nature with that samta. And to take apart that gatha further, the first line, Ichcha Nirod, is what it means is that desires distance us from who we are, and samyak tap brings us closer to our true self. And that should be the goal of any tap that we do, overcoming the desire. But along with tap, it should be accompanied by more control. For example, if you are doing an upvas, you cannot be doing an upvas and then go to a party and indulge the rest of your senses. You should be thinking about what you're trying to do, which is overcome that desire of food, instead of losing control over everything else. Is from Pannyas Labdhivallabh Maharaj Sahib, and he often says that we look at how many upvas we did, but we don't look at how much we've really overcome our desire for food, which is what I was explaining earlier. And then the second line, Parinati Samata Yogi. So Parinati means change. Samata, like I said, means peace or equanimity. And Yog means getting closer to ourselves. So that goes back to that point that Samata is necessary for Nirjara, and Yog, so Samata is also necessary for Yog of the Man, Vachan, Kaya, so my mind, speech, and body. So the external types of tap are Anshan, Unodari, Vritti Sankshep, Rastyag, Kaya Klesh, and Sanilati. So Anshan is probably the most common one that people think of, and it's fasting or not eating. So I'll go into the details of that later on. And Unodari is eating like less, eating less than what would like satiate you. So like before you're full, you still stop eating. And then Vritti Sankshep is limiting the food items. And Kaya Klesh is physical forbearance. So one of the examples of that is like sleeping on the floor. So you're not exposing your body to those comforts like a bed. And then an example of Sanilta would be how in Samayik, when we stay still, that is Sanilta because we're controlling our body and making sure that we don't move. And then an example of Rastyag would be Ayambil, like during Oli, not eating any of the tasty foods or spices or butter and stuff like that. And another thing that Mara Sahibs do that is part of Rastyag is eating from only one side of their mouth. So they'll only chew on one side of their mouth, which means the food doesn't reach all of the taste buds, making their food less tasty and controlling that desire again. And then lastly, another example of that is some Mara Sahibs will mix all of like the different parts of their meal into one item or dravya. So that also is not as tasty as it would have been if you ate them separately. Like if you had like rice, dal, and a sabji, then you'd put them all in one to eat it. And then to go into the types of anshan, so this is again the fasting or not eating. So there's multiple types or things that you can do as part of it. So Mutti Siyam is saying Navkar and making a fist, what you say, before eating any meal. Navkarsi is taking food 48 minutes after sunrise. And then the rest of those, so this slide only covers like the partial vows that you can do for fasting. And before I get into the others, there are 4 prahars in each day, so it's like a unit of time, splitting up the day, and the rest of the different anshans like rely on that timetable, sort of. So Porsi is eating or drinking after 1 prahar, then Sadporsi is 1.5 prahars, Puri Mutta is after 2 prahars, and Avad is after 3 prahars. Vyasna, Ikashna, Ayambil, Nivi, and Upas. So Vyasna is only eating 2 meals between sunrise and sunset. Ikashna is only once a day. Ayambil is like I said before, the 1 meal, but without the tasty aspects of the meal. Nivi is like Ayambil, but you can use light buttermilk and haldi, so like a less extreme version. And then Upvas is not eating, but you can have achit water or without any water. And all of these you should consider, you have to do at least a choviyar the previous night and a navkarsi the morning after. So it has to be an entire day thing, not just between sunrise and sunset. So now on to the internal types of tap. So there's prayaschit, which is the repentance or regretting your mistakes. So a big example of this would be pratikaman, which is asking for forgiveness. And with that, we say the Satlak Sutra, which is asking for forgiveness from all the different types of jeeves. And then another way you can do prayaschit is by writing or talking to a Mara side and asking what you can do to make up for the different types of pap that you've done, how to make up for that. And then there's bhav alochana, so things that you're repenting for your entire life. And then there's pudgal vosirane ki kriya, and so that is for all the past lives. So you're repenting for the mistakes that you've made, both in the life that you're living now and all the previous lives that you've lived before that. And then vinay is humility and modesty and respect for gurus. Like respecting your guru comes with taking their permission for even things like breathing. So you're giving almost your control of yourself to them. And then vairutya is selfless service, which also goes into accepting the agnya of guru. And then there's Swadhyay, which is like an umbrella term an umbrella definition would be learning about ourselves through the agams. And that process of learning can be like split up. So the first part would be vachna, and so that's the discourses from the guru that's given and listening to those. And then ruchana is asking questions after. Paravartana is revising or repeating the concepts that are taught. And anupreksha is reflecting at a deeper level and evaluating ourselves. And then lastly, dharmopadesha is being able to grasp the essence of the content and apply it to an extent that it inspires others around you. And then there's dhyan, which I will get into more. And kayotsarga is like the last part of dhyan, which is abandoning all worldly things and being completely one with the soul. So a story that we learned about that covers all the internal types of tap really well is the story of Mashtush Muni. So in Mashtush Muni's previous life, he was a very learned man and was able to like answer people's questions because of how many scriptures he had learned. So when people would come to him, he would build for answers. He had built this sort of pride or ego. And then, so he kind of got annoyed with how many questions people were asking. And mentally, he like wished he didn't know as much as he did so people would leave him alone. So because of that, in the next life, even though he had that vairagya bhavana and had a guru, and he could not complete Swadhyay because he could not remember any of the sutras that his guru was teaching him. So when his guru like recognized this, that it's not that he's not understanding the concepts, it's this, that he cannot memorize the words, he said to only memorize 2 words, marush, which means don't be sad or depressed, and matush, which means don't get angry. So that was his assigned Swadhyay. So he was supposed to just say those 2 words and contemplate that. But even those 2 words he couldn't say, and so he like made it 1 word, which would be mashtush, which is why he's called Mashtush Muni. And so people would always make fun of him for that because as a Muni, he was not able to even say 2 words. He was, they saw him like he wasn't able to complete such a simple task. But even though people were taunting him and it was insulting, he never got angry and he wasn't sad because he still remembered that. And that Vinay and that Paravartana shed all of his karmas, and he accepted those faults, and that is how he got Keval Gyan. And another part of that is that he maintained samta through that entire, through all of the insults and teasing. So that is an example of how powerful internal tap can be. Yeah, and then, so dhyan, which something Bhaktiyogacharya Shri Yashovijaysuriji would say was that dhyan is the state of being, not doing. So Artha Dhyan is maintaining attachment, and having a lot of Artha Dhyan, like possessiveness to worldly things, will lead you to Tiryanch Gati. And then Raudra Dhyan is getting upset when things don't go according to your plan. So getting upset and holding on to that anger or frustration. And a lot of that will lead you to Narki. So both of those, Artha and Raudra Dhyan, should obviously be avoided, and they accumulate bad karmas. Then Dharma and Shukla Dhyan are like the good types of Dhyan. It's what you feel during while you're doing dharam and puja and things like that. And those are the two types of dhyan that actually lead you to shed karma and actually do nirjara. The process of Dharma and Shukla Dhyan should start with Swadhyay, and then an example of achieving that would be to then move on to Jap, which kind of cuts off the mind from any external thoughts from coming in. And then after that, eventually you'll lose your sense of time, place, and body, and spending enough time and moving on to the next stage, which is Kayotsarga, would be giving up the physical, verbal, and mental aspects of yourself and being fully absorbed into the qualities of the soul. And 48 minutes of this true dhyan in Kayotsarga will lead to liberation. So Param Pujya Acharya Muktidarshansuriji Sahib said that the 6 external tap leads to Sadgati, which is Dev and Manushya Gati, and the 6 internal taps can lead to moksha. So that's kind of a testament to the fact that you need both external and internal tap to work together in order to achieve your goal, which is moksha and liberation. And also the fact that your intentions and belief system matter. So even if you're doing the external taps, it means nothing if you don't have the bhavana and the internal tap to accompany it. So application. From everything that I've learned, there are a few things that I want to do. So daily, I'd like to start taking the Muttisayam a few times a week. And then a few times a year, I'd like to do an Ayambil and Nagpagoli and Upvas in Paryushan. And then I'd like to continue and try to do more jap at home, and then learn to notice, because that's a bit hard, to notice my Artha and Raudra Dhyan. So yeah. Thank you.